asleep. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We're going to begin the service. I'll start first by chanting from the Book of Psalms. Chant it first in Hebrew and then offer an English translation. This is Psalm 121. Shir lamalot, esahinai, eleharim, me'ayin yavo ezri, esahinai, eleharim, me'ayin yavo ezri, ezri, me'im Adonai, Ose, Shamayim v'haaretz, ezri, me'im Adonai, Ose, Shamayim v'haaretz, al yiten lamot raglecha, al yanun shomrecha, hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael, Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzecha yad yaminecha, Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach b'layla, Adonai yishmorcha mikora, yishmor et nafshecha, Adonai yishmor tzedcha uvecha, me'ata ve'ad olam. Song for ascent. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. Adonai will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your protection. The guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm and guard your life. Adonai guards your going and coming now and forever. We're gathered here today to pay our tribute of affection and respect to a dear friend and loved one, to Philip Maltz, in Hebrew, whose name was Pinchas Beryl ben Mendel V'Shendel. And Philip, or Phil, was born on April 3rd, 1927, here in Winnipeg, and he left this world on September 3rd, corresponding to the 18th of Elul. He was preceded in death by his parents, Max and Sally, and by his wife Miriam and his brother Shalom. I want to offer our condolences to his family, to his daughter Sharon, to his son-in-law Howard, to his grandchildren, to Matthew, Ryan, and Michael, to his sister Anne, his niece Melanie, and his nephew Chuck, and to his cousin Colette, Ruben, and to her family. And at this time, I'd like to ask Sharon to come forward. I know she has some words to share about her dad.
My father was born April 3rd, 1927 in Winnipeg. His parents, who were known in Yiddish as Mendel and Shendel, or Max and Sally, left Poland and sailed aboard the SS Estonia, arriving in Halifax on January 6, 1927. What must have been a difficult journey gave way to a safer life in Winnipeg. Philip was a proud North Ender. He and his parents lived first on Charles Street and then in a house on Stella Avenue, just south of Salter. His cousin Colette has shared with me how when she and her family came over, my dad and his family were very welcoming to them. And my dad has spoken to me many times of how much he enjoyed his family and his friends who lived in that area at that time. My father had a brother, Shalom, who died as an infant. He had a younger sister, Annie, with whom he remained close throughout his life. As children, Annie and Phil participated in music lessons, Philip as a violinist and Annie as a piano player. While Annie continued to be an accomplished pianist as an adult, Phil's only musical legacy is a black and white photo where he is dressed in the finery of the time, that is shorter pants and a jacket, and holding his violin. Philip attended Aberdeen School and graduated from St. John's High. He was a hard worker, and as a teenager he began working part-time. Some of his jobs included selling newspapers at the corner of Portage and McDonald. During the Second World War, he worked in a factory that made an explosive called cordite and in a factory that made powdered eggs for soldiers. He had aspirations about medical school, but there were quotas for Jewish applicants, and that was not meant to be. After completing undergraduate courses at the University of Manitoba, he traveled to New York, where his cousins, the Spiras, made him feel welcome. In New York, he studied fashion design at the Schick School of Fashion. When Philip returned to Winnipeg, he entered the business world with his father. Phil was then 22 years old. Together they operated a fur store, which was called Paris Furs. The main store was located on Graham Avenue, where the Millennium Library now stands. They also had a satellite store in Neepawa, Manitoba, and my dad used to drive out there to deliver and collect coats. During one of our last conversations, my dad and I discussed that store. He remembered that the store was on First Street, and I remembered that he used to drive to Neepawa in their blue panel truck. When his father Mendel died in 1966, Philip decided to return to school at the University of Manitoba. He obtained his Certified General Accountant designation and worked for a couple of accounting firms before finding a fulfilling career as the manager of the Mall Medical Clinic. He was proud of his work there, and when asked by staff at the Simpkins Center to tell him about his life, he said, "I ran a good clinic." He worked there until he was 62, when the clinic downsized and no longer needed a full-time manager. Philip married my mother Miriam on August 3rd, 1958. They had a long and successful partnership, with each being in charge of certain aspects of their life. My father was in charge of the garden, as their house on Arrowwood Drive South came with a lovely park-like yard which required maintenance. He looked after the many trees and shrubs, the roses, the begonias in the backyard, and he always planted red geraniums in the front flower planter. This year I planted some red geraniums, which was inspired by his favorite flower. He was also in charge of finances and, as an accountant, did a meticulous job of record keeping. He was in charge of transportation, as my mother did not enjoy driving and eventually gave it up entirely. After his retirement, Phil spent many hours driving my mother to her work, grocery shopping, and appointments. He was a patient chauffeur, although he once said of my mother, when she goes into a store, she touches every dress. When I was 12 years old, my father introduced me to the world of live hockey when he took me to see the Winnipeg Jets, then in the WHA. I was hooked, and my father soon acquired season tickets, which were situated 4 rows behind the Jets bench. He and I went to at least 20 regular games per year, plus playoffs, for 22 years. My father was also a Blue Bombers season ticket holder, and I accompanied him to all of their games, as well as to the first Grey Cup ever held in Winnipeg. I have so many fond memories of the time we spent together at all those games. Phil was a proud Zedek to Matthew, Ryan, and Michael. When Matthew was born, he was the first of the grandparents to hold him. For many years, Phil and Miriam used to get together with us Sunday evenings for dinners, and they enjoyed fitting in some playtime with their boys. They were incredibly generous to their grandchildren and started an RESP when Matthew was all of 1 month old. My father was particularly keen to maximize his contributions so the full government grant would be received, and the boys have benefited tremendously by their generosity. Their generosity extended to all of us. When Matthew was born, I was driving a 2-door car, which was my father's old 87 Celica. He knew I was having trouble getting the baby car seat in and out of a 2-door car, so in 1997, he bought himself a green Camry and gave me his 1990 Camry. That pattern continued over the years, as every 7 years my father bought himself a new car and gave us his old car. Fittingly, we still have the 1997 Camry, which Matthew drives, and the 2004 Infiniti, which Ryan and Howard drive. Phil had many health issues. These included his suffering a heart attack when he was in his late 40s. He was fortunate this happened while he was working at the Mall Medical, and that one of the doctors recognized what was happening and made sure he received immediate medical care. Following his heart attack, my father took up running, and he was an early member of the Refit Center. He was proud to have run a few shorter marathons between Winnipeg Beach and Gimli. Phil was also an avid swimmer, having been a lifeguard while he was younger. For many years, he enjoyed swimming at the campus and particularly enjoyed having coffee afterwards with his friends. And for a time after he had given up swimming, he still went to have coffee with his friends. Other health issues included surgery for bowel cancer in the late 1980s, knee replacement surgery, and surgery for a bowel obstruction in 2016. His ability to walk independently diminished, and sadly, my once active father was restricted to a wheelchair in the later years of his life. Phil and Miriam lived for many years in their house on Arrowwood Drive South. They sold their house in 1991 and moved to an apartment on Wellington Crescent. They enjoyed living in Osborne Village. They had an active social life and had many friends who they saw for dinner or other activities. During the summer of 2016, both Phil and Miriam required surgery, and it became apparent that as much as they valued their independence, they couldn't manage on their own. They moved to River Ridge, which meant they were close by their family. It was not an easy transition, as my father had mobility issues and my mother was in the early stages of dementia. In 2018, Phil made the difficult decision to move to the Simpkins Center. Phil adapted quickly to his new surroundings. The staff of the Simpkins Center have been wonderful to him, and as he became more frail, they made recommendations which made things easier for him. Phil was fortunate to find his companion Edison. Edison and his wife Maria have taken wonderful care of my father and have sent me many photos of Phil on walks, enjoying snacks, or in some cases singing "O Canada." I will be forever grateful for the care they have shown him. Phil's mental faculties were strong well into his 90s. He enjoyed keeping informed of news and of his beloved stock market. In January 2021, he suffered his first bout with COVID, and thereafter he experienced bouts of confusion. For a time, he believed that the Simpkins Center was the medical clinic he was running, and he told me that he had to fire some staff. His dear nurse, Jane, just told me that he fired her several times. Over the last months, the confusion was more prevalent. However, there were things he still enjoyed, like food and music, right to the end. Michael and I went to see my father on Friday, September 1st. We took him a chocolate ice cream sundae from Dairy Queen. Although his eyes were closed and he couldn't feed himself, I offered him spoonful after spoonful, and he was able to finish the entire thing. I'm so thankful that we shared that last treat with him. My father passed Sunday, September 3rd. It happened quickly, and I'm thankful he didn't suffer for long. He had a very long, productive, and mostly happy life. He will be forever loved and missed by me, his grandsons, Matthew, Brian, Michael, son-in-law Howard, sister Ann Pashenik, his niece Melanie Pashenik, and nephew Chuck Pashenik, cousins Paulette Rubin, Jerry Rubin, Kim Hurd family, as well as extended family in Ottawa, Toronto, and New York. Sleep well, Dad.
You've heard so much about the attributes that Phil possessed, and I don't want to be redundant or repeat what Sharon has just offered, but I just wanted to highlight a few other things about Phil. Yiddishkeit was really important to him, and there's no definitive idea of what Yiddishkeit means, because it means something to each individual person. Their Jewish identity manifests in different ways. And for Phil, he maintained his membership, as you heard, at the YMHA. He was also, I'm not sure if people knew this, a member of the Menorah Masonic Lodge, and for a while served as a board member of the Rosh Pina Synagogue, and also had a wonderful relationship with Rabbi Shalom Rappaport of blessed memory. He was also involved in the Jewish Child and Family Services, and as you've heard, the Refit Center. These are places that were the center of his commitment and interests. What you've also learned is that Phil was someone who didn't shy away from learning. I always find it fascinating when later in life, people who seem pretty set in what they're doing in terms of their vocation are open to learning and adapting and trying new things. And as you've heard, he became quite adept at being a stockbroker. In fact, I think there was one point after a major surgery in the late 80s where at St. Boniface he started to dispense some of his wisdom to the staff who were gathered around his bedside. And apparently they're doing quite well as a result. You also heard that he was a very attentive father. Beyond the Jets and the Bomber games, I think it's fair to say that he did whatever he could for Sharon, and then extended that to Howard and to his grandchildren. I'm told that Phil took an instant liking to Howard, although they might have had different tastes in terms of their primary alcoholic beverages. One enjoyed vodka, whereas the other had a more refined sense of enjoying the luxurious Scotch beverage. Howard will fill you in on that. Their relationship blossomed, so much so that the two traveled to New York together. How many people can say that they did that with their father-in-law? In fact, everyone knows Howard. He's pretty straightforward, and he said to Phil, how'd you like to travel to New York with me? I have a trade show. And thinking that Phil would say no, Phil actually agreed to go and was very excited. And it turns out that they had a wonderful time. Phil was able to become reacquainted with the city that he had fallen in love with as a young man. They ate very well. Howard will fill in those details. They even went to a Broadway show, Chicago, for all of you Broadway enthusiasts, and saw many important New York City sights. For Phil, his first priority was his family, his wife, and most especially his daughter, her husband, and his grandchildren. And family was everything to him, and so was his Jewish community. When Phil and Miriam retired, they enjoyed traveling. And I want to say again that Phil was very devoted to Miriam and expressed this by being very meticulous with his accounting and organizing their finances on a regular basis. On the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba, there's a page that's dedicated to Philip and Miriam, and it says, "Our family is rooted here, and we hope that our children and grandchildren remain involved and active participants in the religious, educational, and social life of the community." You've heard how excited Phil and Miriam were to become grandparents, and I'll leave that to Sharon to continue to tell you about that, and leave it to his grandchildren to tell you what kind of grandfather he was. And you've also heard about the fleet of cars they now possess. Most of all, in terms of Judaism, Phil really took the concept, and I know this well because on the several occasions I got to see him at the Simkin Center, mostly before the pandemic, he really received people with a sense of V'hayu mekabel et kol adam b'sefer panim yafot, to greet every person with a pleasant face. And what I really liked about Phil, and I shared this with Sharon, is he didn't mince words. He told you how he was feeling, and he treated me with tremendous respect, and always made an effort to look at you panim el panim, despite his physical pain, despite some of whatever else was going on medically for him. He had that encounter with you face to face. So I want to thank God for all the blessings which you, Adonai, have bestowed upon all of us in the form of Pinchas, Beryl, Ben Mendel V'Shendel. Tehei nafsho tzura b'tzura chayim. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. We're going to proceed with an important part of the service, which is placing earth on the casket. It's our understanding, call it mythology, call it whatever you like, that we descend from the earth. That's where the first person, Adam, right? That etymological connection between Adam and Adama. Adam is the first person, Adama is the ground. And so that's how we return, and we hope that our loved one is accompanied by God and embraced in God's presence.
I would encourage all of you who can to be able to participate in the sacred mitzvah, this Temple Shalom, this purest form of kindness that we can bestow on our loved one. The custom is to initially to take the shovel and to hold it upside down. As you've heard me say before, it's a way to let God know that you're disappointed in God's decision. It's also a way to say that I didn't realize your dad was a gardener. This is not gardening. This is a different kind of use of the shovel. So we hold it upside down initially. And then you can switch it over, and I encourage you to do a total of 3 shovelfuls. The other custom is to allow the next individual to enter into the sacred space. So if I'm not going to pass the shovel to the next individual, that's actually a sign of respect. And so we place it down. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover the top of the basket. For those of you who, once we've concluded the formal part of the service, you can return and place additional earth in this basket if you like. I'll have Shaarey and Howard come first. And people can do this simultaneously on both sides. So there's room over there. And there's room here.
What I'm going to suggest is that we'll stop with the next two folks here and the next three over there. And then again, if you'd like to, after we've concluded the service, if you'd like to come back and place additional earth on the casket, you are encouraged to do so. Okay, well, I'm going to have everyone come back and we'll regroup. Before we conclude with the El Malei Rachamim and the Mourner's Kaddish, I want to just pause here, take a moment of silence, and while we take a moment of silence to think about Phil, you know, I've heard people say a few times, well, you know, he was 96, as if that should make us feel better about his passing. Some of you have heard me say this before. I don't think you ever get over the loss of someone who had a significant role in your life, regardless of what age they lived to. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Phil, again, was his honesty. Sometimes he was very direct, but he also really valued relationships. And as Howard shared with me just a few minutes ago, Phil and Miriam both made an effort, along with Howard's parents, to really get to know one another and establish a friendship. And I know that meant a great deal to Howard and to Sharon. So this is the Tziduk Adin, and I invite you just to stand in silence as I recite this quietly. Just before I recite the El Malei Rachamim, just a couple of announcements. Should you wish to make a contribution in Phil's memory in the form of tzedakah, there you have at least 3 options or more of your own choosing. One is to the Scholarship Fund at the Seven Oaks Foundation for Excellence in English Studies at Garden City. And then the second is the Philip and Miriam Maltz Fund at the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. The third is to the Simkin Center, where, as you heard Sharon say, her dad moved there in 2018. And that was a place where he was really valued and cherished and really respected. I also want to let you know that immediately after we're done here, at the cemetery, there'll be a meal of consolation, a Sudat Havra'ah at the Eitz Chaim Synagogue, Congregation Eitz Chaim, currently at 123 Matheson Avenue East. I have to emphasize the current. There'll also be Shiva this evening and tomorrow night. It'll be taking place at 64 Ambassador Row at Sharon and Howard's home, again Wednesday and Thursday from 7 to 9. And they'll be davening as well. This is the El Malei Rachamim. El Malei Rachamim Ashocheim Bamromim Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Shechina B'malot Kedoshim Utorim K'Zohar Akiyam Azirihim Nishmat Pinchas Berel Ben Mendo V'Shendo Shalach Le'olamo B'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchato Ana Bararachamim Hastirehu B'Setek Nafecha Le'olamim Utzor B'Tzor Chaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachlato V'Yanuach B'Shalom HaMishkavo V'Nomar Amen. At this point, we'll ask Sharon and her family to recite the Mourner's Kaddish.
Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabah, ve'alma dibra perutei, ve'amlech malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabah mevarach v'olam v'olei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yifa'ar v'yitramam v'yinaseh. Yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kudusha v'richud. La'ela v'kol birkata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'iran ve'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlom Rabah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'imrumav, u'yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
And so, before we really conclude, I want to say to you, Sharon, and to your whole family, and to all of us, these words of comfort that we recite, we say to someone who's in mourning. Say the following: Hamakom Yinachem Echem B'Tov Shah Beit Zion Yerushalayim. God, continue to bring comfort amongst all the mourners of Zion, Jerusalem, throughout the entire world. This concludes the service. If anybody would like again to place additional earth on the casket, I encourage you to do so. A reminder that there is